I've been asked in the afternoon to unpack the benefits of bunch grass. And I just thought, it's so predictable, right? We're going to get the Californian who drives a van, plays guitar, likes to surf, and talks really slowly. We're going to get him up to talk about the benefits of bunch grass. Contrary to popular opinion, my state is not responsible for the legalization of recreational marijuana. That's the state of Washington. State of Washington is to blame for that. We were more on the medicinal end. Brian didn't give me this topic for those reasons. He gave me this topic because he knows that as long as he's known me, I've wanted to see a constellation, laughing to crying. Way to go, Trav. As long as he's known me, he's known that I've got a desire to see a constellation of churches in my state, but in particular in the Central Valley. And so we've been dreaming for quite some time about how to change the Central Valley and change our state. And I've dreamed that dream with friends who are here and are now in Exeter and in Tulare and in Dinuba and in Porterville. And we're believing God for a bunch of towns you've never heard of. You've never heard of these towns. You'll never go to these towns. There's no reason to go to these towns, but we love these towns. And that love for these places has been egged on through the years by Donnie and his heart for small towns. And so Tiff reminded me last night as I was wrestling, I'm not sure I've got something to say about bunch grass. And she said, no, for years, we've driven through small rural farm towns, seen an old theater, and thought, man, one Bible-believing, Spirit-filled, elder-led church on mission in this community would change it. And we're starting to see that by God's grace. And so I think that's why Brian asked me to talk about what we mean when we say bunch grass, because apparently the word has stuck and we're going to live with it a little. And so I'm mostly going to share with you some prophetic direction. I am not sharing God's word. I'm sharing you a prophetic word that we are weighing together. So please, this afternoon be much more like a sharing. We're going to slow things down a little bit. And we're going to reduce the number of slides and tell a few more stories. And then to conclude our time, we've got a video that's been sent from Reese Scott, who wasn't able to be with us, but we're going to get a chance to hear from him and pray for him. So here we have it, the background of bunch grass. And then I'll move to my second point, the benefits of bunch grass. I kept texting Brian. I was like, man, I'm not feeling this. I don't want to preach on bunch grass. And he's like, you're not preaching about bunch grass. You're preaching about our togetherness, So point one, the background of bunch grass. Point two, the benefits of bunch grass. So if you haven't heard this before, Confluence is one of many movements, one of many families, one of many streams that has come out of New Frontiers. And New Frontiers, rather than name someone to succeed, they decided to multiply. So they've multiplied into many families, many streams, many movements. And so it got decentralized in many ways, but New Frontiers still comes together at certain times and for certain reasons. And the man tasked with holding New Frontiers together right now is a guy named Steve Tibbert. Does anyone know Steve Tibbert? Heard of Steve Tibbert? So inviting Steve Tibbert to your church is a little like inviting Gordon Ramsay into your kitchen. It's true. It's a bit like singing for Simon Cowell. So it's half Gordon Ramsay, half Simon Cowell. And I love him. I appreciate him. And if we're recording this, we're going to edit this out. And Andre, you're not going to mention this. He's had some strong things to say to me over the years. In a now famous visit to my church, after having a look-see, that's what Steve would call it, a look-see, right? After having a look-see, Steve told me the truth and told our team the truth. And I'm used to having other pastors in and them being pretty impressed with what we're doing. Now, it's not perfect, but I'm used to them stepping in, being mostly impressed, and having just a few do differentlies. And Steve, in his Good to Grow book, anyone read that? Is it any surprise to anybody that I had some problems with the guy who wrote a book, Good to Grow? So the artist and the pragmatist are clashing. You've probably heard the story. But he sits down with my team and he draws this triangle. And that triangle is in his book, Good to Grow. And on one side of the triangle is finances. On the other side is facility. And then the bottom is team. And he sits down with us and he says, you have financial issues, you have facility issues, and you have team issues. You're not good to grow. And then in the meeting, he says, but that's not your biggest issue. Your biggest issue is that guy. And he points at me. And he says, because that guy doesn't have enough gas in the tank to lead you out of those issues. The issue that you know about, the issue that you see is never your biggest issue. So that Steve Tibbert comes to join our Confluence team meeting in Dallas. This is May of 2022. Brian's there, and Bo and Carl and Ian and Sam and many are there. And he sits down and he's like, all right, guys, Confluence is 40 some odd churches. I think there's 4 different nations represented. And then he says, when I come back in 5 years, how many churches will you guys have planted? And how many nations will you have reached? And rather than tell him our aspirations for the future, we started rehearsing our past. We started to tell him, he was asking like, where will you be? And we started rehearsing where we had been. Has that ever happened to any of you? It's like Jesus asking the invalid who's been sitting by the pool for 38 years, like, do you want to be healed? And he's like, well, there's these, you don't get it. Like every time the pool gets stirred, there's no one to take us down there. And Jesus is like, that's not what I asked. Like, do you want to be healed? So we kind of told Steve, well, you don't get it. We got no one to carry us to the pool. And then we told him like, hey, not everything that works in England works over here. We wanted a separation for a reason. And so he says to us, all right. He says, then I suspect when I return in 5 years that you're still going to be 40 some odd churches who love each other dearly, but haven't advanced or taken any ground. And it was heavy. It was heavy that night. We went to bed heavy-hearted. It was 2022, so I think we were all still reeling from COVID. And we're like, man, plant, we're trying not to quit. Like, I should mention as well that, is this too much detail? We doing all right? I should mention as well, this is family, it's family hour. I should mention as well that Scott Marks was there, and he travels with Steve because Scott is a ball of African joy. And he travels with Simon Cowell for obvious reasons. It's really hard to be in a bad mood around Scott Marks. You should try it. It's hard. It's really easy to be in a bad mood around Steve Tibbert. And so Scott Marks is encouraging us that night as we have Tex-Mex in Dallas, right? And so that night, Sam Poe, who's with us, has a dream. And I think that the dream is not the result of Mexican food. That's not it. Sam knows the difference. He's no stranger to Mexican food, and he's no stranger to directional prophetic words. He knows the difference, right? Bad lengua, and the word of the Lord are two different things. And so here's the dream. Let me read it to you. Long tee up, sorry. I, Sam Poe, had this dream at the Confluence team meeting in Dallas, Texas. In the dream, I was conscious of the presence of Jesus with me. He was showing me a field full of bunch grass. This would have been a common sight for me to see in my years growing up, see it in central Washington. My parents had a rocky, dry land farm, and this was an important feature of the food source for the livestock they kept. In the dream, the question I had for the Lord was, why are you showing me this? And immediately I sensed this was a picture of a way of church planting in the place and time we find ourselves in. Here are some characteristics of bunch grass that were brought to my attention, things I was somewhat aware of from my childhood. Bunch grass can grow on poor, rocky soil where other crops don't do well because it's a native perennial grass which has a deeply set root system in that soil. It is very difficult to uproot because it grows in clusters or bunches whose roots are woven together, not individualized blades of grass. This produces sustainability. Bunch grass is nutrient rich, a good food source. Due to this quality of being deeply rooted, bunch grass is very drought resistant. It weathers dry and difficult times well. It remains a viable food source for those in difficult times. Bunch grass in a field helps keep erosion from happening when the rains do come. It holds the rain in the soil and puts it to good use. Bunch grass multiplies well. The seed it produces replants itself in the surrounding area very effectively, and therefore much less of the seed is wasted. So we woke up the next morning having gone to bed pretty heavy-hearted, and while unpacking this dream together, we had an incredibly fruitful discussion. Not just about what we were called to do, but how we were called to do it. And which it's led us to believe that in this next season together, we're supposed to be planting with greater proximity and partnership in regions. The conversation was about shared root systems. The conversation was about what was sustainable. The conversation was about withstanding droughts. And I just want to share with you some of the vision, some of the language that has emerged. So when this is referred to, we're not going, what is that? And what exactly are we talking about? Of course, Brian's right. I'm not teaching on bunch grass. And I'm not even teaching right now on a new prophetic direction. This is a very old, deeply held belief that we're better together. That we can do more together than we can apart. This is a very consistent theme in the New Testament churches, and it's also been a very consistent theme for New Frontiers through the years. And this belief we know you hold. That's why you're here. That's why you've given your time off and paid money to be here together, because you believe this. So, we believe that churches should partner together to strengthen existing churches, and that we should partner together to plant new churches that fulfill the Great Commandment, right? And the Great Commission that we've been hearing so much about, right? So I just want to tackle 4 things our togetherness accomplishes. These are referred to in the dream that I shared with you. The first one is that our togetherness feeds the sheep. There's some reference in the dream of the nutrients of our togetherness. It's like a food source for the livestock, that together we feed the need, right? So when we plant with proximity and we partner in regions, we're able to supply the gifts that are lacking in local communities so that the body can grow and mature. A myriad of gifts is needed for the body to mature. Josh prayed it and referenced it in the last session, but when we talk about this, we all go straight to Ephesians 4. Let me read verses 1 through 16. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives and he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he also descended into the lower regions of the earth? Josh is here to answer all your questions about the intermediate state and where exactly Jesus went. That's not where we're going. He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint, with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. We love this text, don't we? We do. And in some ways, I feel like, almost like the second chapter of Acts, I think we can idealize this text. A myriad of gifts is needed for the church to reach maturity and grow up. And when we read this, man, we see the harmony. We see the beauty. But it can be messy to have a myriad of gifts working in your local church. This is beautiful. And often Ephesians is just cosmic in its scope. It's beautiful what's portrayed here. And when it's working well, it's really wonderful. but it's really messy. Am I right? Having these gifts present in the same meeting can be a really tough meeting, because every one of these gifts is absolutely sure that they know what the problem is, and they're sure that the answer is more of what they already possess. You've experienced this before, where the apostolic gift is like, what about the next town? There's a real tension represented here. The apostolic gift is like, what about the next town? And the pastoral gift's like, what about Susan? She has cancer. We can't even take care of our own. What are we doing thinking we're going to plant another church? And then the teacher says, if we had better doctrine, it would solve both those issues. And then the evangelist says, why are we in another meeting? And then they go on some rant about the four walls. Evangelists are always so anti-four walls. The four walls, the four walls. We got to get out of these four walls and out of these meetings, you know? Scott said it yesterday. Yeah, you did. You were like, I don't want to be in any meetings. You were like, I don't want to work at a church maybe. It's full of meetings. It's probably a key sign you're an evangelist, is you hate all the meetings. And then the prophet says something along the lines of, this is why we should spend more of our time in prayer together, hearing what God might say to us, because the sons of Issachar knew how to discern the times. The prophets are always talking about the sons of Issachar. You're like, what are these guys doing? Oh, you don't know about the sons of Issachar? Then you probably don't know about the blood moons either, do you? Our togetherness is not easy, is it? I told those stories about Steve, not to throw Steve under the bus. Our togetherness is not easy. Some of the outside input is invited. But even the outside input that's not invited is needed. And this is nutrient rich. That's what Sam says in the word. This is nutrient rich. And not many things that are nutrient rich are desirable. That's why when we eat something, we're like, this can't be good for you because it tastes good. Like, those things can't go together. Not many things that are nutrient rich and good for you are what you want. When we plant together with proximity, we felt like we're able to partner and supply gifts that are needed and lacking in local communities so that we can mature and we can grow and we can experience the beauty of this gift tension together. My favorite story recently of outside input that's needed but not necessary, or maybe you don't think it's necessarily wanted. Like, it's needed, but it's not wanted. The best example I can think of recently, when talking about something coming your way that's not what you would have chosen, is the story of the church at Antioch. And you can read the whole story in Acts 11 and 13, and I'm going to try my best to be brief. But this church gets planted in Antioch through forced migration. Migrants became missionaries. We're with you guys. Trusting God. Inspired by the fact that in losing your homes and losing your communities, you've not lost your desire to share the gospel. Thanks for preaching the gospel in Detroit. So this church in Antioch gets planted because people are forced from their homes due to religious persecution. The church in Antioch was the result of religious persecution. And people were forced from their homes after the martyrdom of Stephen. And it says that Saul was ravaging the church at this time. He was entering house after house, dragging off men and women and committing them to prison. This persecution arose after the martyrdom of Stephen, and they fled. And when they fled to Antioch, they didn't stop sharing their faith. Isn't that insane? They weren't like, hey, let's just lay low for a bit, okay? Let's just get reestablished in a new place before we start to build. As they're running for their lives, they keep sharing the good news about Jesus the Messiah with Jews. And Jews are converting as they go. But as they go, a wild thing starts happening, and they start sharing their faith with Greeks. And it says a great number of them responded to the message of Jesus as well. And so what we have in Antioch is the first sort of mixed meeting, and Jerusalem gets word of this. And of course, they're like, we better go check this out. So they send Barnabas as their delegate. Barnabas gets there, and it says that he saw the grace of God. And I don't actually know what that means, but I think I know what that means. I think we know what that is, although none of us could describe it, probably. He saw the grace of God. And it says that he was glad, and then he exhorted them, oh, don't change a thing. Don't do anything differently. He's like, remain faithful and be steadfast with your purpose. Like whatever you're doing, don't do anything. It's very different than the talk I got from Steve. He's like, you're good to grow. You're good to grow. Then Barnabas says, you guys got it going on, but I see something that's missing. Hold on, I'll be right back. And he goes 300 kilometers. And he comes back with who? Saul of Tarsus. Why are they in Antioch? Saul of Tarsus. And Barnabas is like, I know exactly what you guys need. He's like, wait here. Keep doing what you're doing. Goes and gets Saul, changes one letter in his name, brings him back. And he's like, ta-da! This is the guy you need. He's going to teach you. And the church is like, teach us what? What is this guy going to teach us? You can't change one letter in his name and expect us to buy this. That's the equivalent of like a fake mustache. So they put a fake mustache on Saul. And it's like, here's the guy. And Barnabas is like, no, this is what you need. And it's not what they would have wanted. It's not what they have chosen. There is no way in the world. And he was perfect. Saul grew up in Tarsus, right? Saul and Barnabas, both Jews. They understand the scriptures, but they were raised outside of Palestine. They spoke Greek. They understood Greek culture. They grew up in multicultural environments as Orthodox Jews. They know exactly what to do, and revival, full-on revivals breaking out. So look so the point was, that there's outside input that's needed, but maybe not invited. You would never go, I think we'll go get Saul. That was, I think, what I was trying to say. The second thing is that our togetherness prevents erosion. That's what he says. The togetherness is preventing erosion. And of course, we've heard from many people, and we know this, that our landscape is weathered. I mean, that's exactly what Brian described this morning is erosion. And our culture feels as if it's wasting away. And much has been said, even by Donnie, about the brokenness that surrounds us and the need of the hour. But it's not just our culture that's eroding. The erosion is not just out there. Our doctrine can drift. It can get watered down and washed out. I was thinking of the passage in Hebrews 2 that says, we must pay closer attention to what we've heard, lest we drift away from it. And we all know that that's possible even in our own lives. So we can point the finger all we want, but we all know what it's like to drift. And even if we're saying all the right things, our hearts have drifted. Which leads me to my second point, our devotion can drift. And I've loved this moment each year to remind us of our first love, our ultimate mission. To minister to him, to love him, to enjoy him, to see him, to be changed by him, right? But our devotion, it can drift. Of course, probably what springs to mind is the warning that comes in Revelation 2 to the church in Ephesus. I know your deeds. I know you're doing the stuff. I know you're working hard and there's perseverance. I know that you're not tolerating wicked people and you're actually not putting up with false teachers. You've tested those who claim to be apostles and are not. You've persevered. You've endured hardships for my name and you've not grown weary. You've worked hard. Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love that you have at first. And we as leaders know this really well, and I've loved this space to be reminded of that, so that our own devotion doesn't erode. I think we all know leaders, pastors that are weathered. I actually don't know another pastor who would not describe himself as beat down right now. And I think we want to extend an invitation and make sure they can belong to this, knowing that we're all together, making sure our doctrine doesn't drift, making sure our devotion doesn't drift, and making sure that our mission doesn't drift. Because we've all experienced this as well, haven't we, in our churches? I went to a church planting assessment last week that Stadia hosted with a church planter, and I was really convicted of a story that they told about the origins of yacht clubs. The origins of yacht clubs are that they were rescue societies. So people who had been rescued at sea, someone had come and rescued them. They were living with a burden to go out during storms and rescue those who were lost at sea. So they gave themselves to building lighthouses and a hut where people could come when they were rescued. So the people who had been rescued were like, we want to return the favor. We want to go out and rescue those who are lost at sea. They would come back with those who had been rescued, and there was a place to shower and a warm meal. And over time, they started to say to themselves, wait a second, we can just enjoy the warm meal and each other's company, and we don't have to go rescue those who are lost at sea. And they became yacht clubs. And as I heard the story, man, I was having a hard time sitting still in my seat. And every year we come together here and we invite gifts into our church to go, this feels like a yacht club, man. Have you lost sight of the fact that you've been rescued? Because that's, again, the real issue that Donnie brought up. You're out of touch with where you were at and what it was like to live tossed. This brings me to the third point. Our togetherness fosters new plants. There's potential in our togetherness. One of the ways you can stop erosion in soil is to actually plant. You plant. I was going to say something about the fertileness of our togetherness, but I felt like I had already burned up my joke quota talking about Steve and weed. So it holds the rain, and retention is made possible through plants. Isn't that wild? Retention made possible through plants. And it's one of the ways that we stop the erosion of the soil, is to, when we feel like we're wasting away, to not back off our desire to plant. Try to preserve ourselves. Lastly, our togetherness produces sustainability. Sam, who knows a lot about bunch grass, it turns out, he talks about the resilience of our togetherness, that it's actually coming in rocky soil, that it's drought resistant, it works in harsh environments, it's tough to uproot. And the reason it's tough to uproot is it has a shared root system. It's not individual blades. Our roots are woven. And of course, you were knit together in your mother's womb. But we believe that we've also, as Colossians 2 says, we've been knit together in love. That this root system here has been woven together. And of course, we don't draw on confluence. Confluence is not the source. But we draw on Jesus. And we give what we've received. And this isn't just about sustaining our church plants. This is about being sustained as the people of God. This root system that's been woven together. I was honored to be a part of Sarah Villahermosa's celebration of life. In the early fall, Sarah, who was here leading us in worship last year, suddenly and tragically passed away, Miguel's wife. And we flew up to be with New Community and support the church. And it was wild too. And I know if Miguel was given the mic, he would say the same thing. It was wild to watch the Confluence family of churches show up for a couple who's just been with us for just a few years. Now, of course, Sarah and Miguel are, they're with us in a really special way. But it was really wild to watch the church come from San Diego to Vancouver, to watch everyone pour in and stand with New Community, and more importantly, stand with Miguel in his time of loss. And this is what we have as a family.